Hello everybody and welcome back to the beautiful, as always, Eryri National Park here in North Wales. And in today's video I want to scout out some locations that I saved on Google Earth and Google Maps recently, and I'm going to talk a little bit about my scouting process during this video. But the main reason that I wanted to do this video today is because I want to talk about some tips for summer photography. It's not always the best time of year for photography. A lot of people generally dislike the summer because of the kind of harsh light and not necessarily interesting colours all of the time. But I want to give you some tips on how you can make the most of this season, and I'm going to give you some examples in today's video. So just because summer is tricky, it doesn't mean that we should avoid photography. It just means that we need to change our approach slightly. So the first tip that I have is thinking about how you're going to edit those photos and how you're going to make best use of the high contrast scenes that you often get in the summer. Now, today is a blue sky day. There are some clouds, but for the most part, the sun is quite harsh, and it just means that all of your shadows and all of your highlights are going to be on kind of either end of the extremes. You're going to get a lot of contrast in your scenes. And when you're shooting in colour, that isn't necessarily the best thing. However, in black and white, that can provide some really, really great results. So when you go out in the summer, don't always think about colour photos. Try and experiment with black and white. Now, I know black and white isn't for everyone, and I certainly don't shoot an awful lot in black and white, but it's always a good thing to try your hand at, because if you've never done it before, it might be something that you really enjoy. So there's a composition behind me that I've seen time and time again, and I've always wondered where it is, and I've finally found it, and it's just this old decrepit looking barn farmhouse type place. And you might think I have some kind of like morbid fascination with things that are abandoned and derelict, but it just so happens that the last few weeks those are just the places that I've ended up. But this composition is one that is just so pleasing because you get the nice S-bend in the road leading up to the house, and then you have the mountains of Snowdonia in the background. You can see some of Tryfan, you can see a bit of Moel Siabod, but there's a lot of cloud at the moment, so unfortunately a lot of those peaks are going to be shrouded slightly. So I'm going to take this shot now. It's not necessarily a particularly difficult scene. The composition is the hardest bit, really. The actual settings are fairly straightforward. I'm just shooting it at around f11, and I'm shooting it at around 1/125th of a second because I had to do it handheld, because the perspective that you need to get the sweep in the road means that I couldn't actually get my tripod in a position, so I've had to do it slightly handheld. So fingers crossed the image isn't blurry, and let me know what you think of this black and white image that I'll put on screen now. So my second tip is all around colour, and this kind of goes into editing, but it's kind of twofold really. The edit is important, but the time of day that you shoot is so important during the summer. Now, if you wanted to try those black and white images like I mentioned in the last clip, then you can go out during, the afternoon between 11 and 3, because that really high sun is going to give you some really nice contrast, and that can look great in black and white images. But if you want to shoot in colour, I recommend sticking to the morning and to the evening, because the light is going to be far easier to work with. It's going to be more flattering, and your photos are going to be better as a result. Now, when it comes to colour and it comes to editing, it is good to embrace those naturally occurring colours that you get in the summer. Everything is very green. Blue sky days are great because it saturates everything, especially if you are shooting in those more favourable times. And it just means that you kind of embrace that and you try to evoke that feeling of warmth in your photos. Embracing summer just means you're going to embrace the seasonality of what summer feels like. There's a photographer called Daniel Casson, and I'm sorry if I've not pronounced that correctly, but I'll put his Instagram handle up on screen now. But he has these beautiful countryside images. They all have this real richness and this real saturation and this feeling of warmth, and I just absolutely love how he makes simple scenes just feel so beautiful. So he is a good example of somebody who definitely embraces those kind of blue sky days in the summer. Now, where am I? I am again at another derelict house. but I'm having some trouble with the actual composition here because I was going to show it you on the back of the camera, but we have this fence here just behind me, and all that means is that I can't get my camera high enough on my tripod, even with the central column extended, to be able to get that fence out of the composition. So I'm going to have to take this shot handheld and just show you guys the results afterwards. Almost got run over. You would think that nobody would come to these really obscure B roads in the back end of Eroe National Park, but you do. But as I was saying, it's really hard to get this fence out of the shot. So I'm going to take the shot handheld and I'm going to show you the composition afterwards. But the thing that really kind of, I guess, interests me here is that this is just another derelict cottage in, Snowdonia that is just being taken over by nature again. It's reclaiming it. The trees are growing, there's loads of, abandoned what looks like farming equipment, and although the windows and doors look like they've been updated, it still has that feeling of that brutality that this national park has on, occupiers, people who live here. It's a tough place to live, albeit very, very beautiful. And this is a shot that, again, because we have the sun now facing it and it's kind of lighting up the face of the house quite nicely, it's catching the leaves on the trees. It's just a nice shot to be able to embrace the warmth and the summery feeling that I'm getting whilst being stood in the middle of this road. It's a beautiful evening though, really, really nice. So let me take the photo now and I'll put the settings and how I shot it up on screen. So now that I'm back home, I just want to round off some of these summer photography tips. And as I mentioned, I want to talk about my scouting process and how I organize where I'm going to go and how I find those places. So just to round off the photography tips before we move on to the scouting, obviously we've talked about shooting in black and white during the harshest part of days where you're going to get those really deep shadows and really bright highlights just to help manage that high contrast scene. And we've also talked about editing in color, and really the main thing there is making sure that you're really kind of leaning in to that seasonality. You're making sure that you're using that saturation and you're not desaturating colors too much, because you want to evoke that feeling of vibrance. And a really important tip around editing in color is to make sure that you're utilizing a warmer white balance wherever possible. Now, you can set that in your camera, or you can do an auto white balance, and then in Lightroom when you're editing you can change the white balance and you can really sort of like fine tune it based on your taste. But if you want to create that warmth and that sort of glow that summer has, then it's always a good idea to put your white balance on the warmer side of things and start to use more magenta than green in your kind of tints if you are going to be tweaking it further. So hopefully those will give you some really great results. And when you're going out in the summer, that's kind of the hardest thing really, is getting those results that we're happy with. So hopefully those tips will give you some ideas when you're out in the field. And speaking of being out in the field, how are you going to find those places to photograph, and how are you going to make sure that you're there at the perfect time to capture those photos? So there are a few apps and a few bits of software that I use to help me with this process, because as with many people, my time is limited, and when I'm dedicating time to go out with my camera, I want to maximize my ability to get photos that I'm happy with. So the first thing you want to think about, especially with summer photography, is what I mentioned in some of the earlier clips about choosing the right time of day and utilizing the light to give you the results that you want, to kind of create that warmth and to remove that sort of harshness if you are shooting in color. And apps such as PhotoPills are great for that, because you can actually track where the sun is going to be at any one point in time. Now that's really useful, because if you've found a location or a composition, let's say, and you're wondering when the best time to visit that place would be, you actually have the ability to visualize, albeit in a kind of virtual augmented reality type way. You can sort of see where the sun is going to track in the sky, what time sunset will be, and where the light is going to be most pleasing. So apps like that are real godsends. And by the way, everything that I'm mentioning, they're not affiliated in any way with myself. I'm not being paid to promote any of these apps. These are just things that I have had experience with and that I think are really useful and great tools to help with your photography. Now, the second app that I use all the time, and it's sort of two apps really, but it's all within the Google sphere, and that is Google Earth and Google Maps. Now, Google Earth is great because of its satellite and because of its 3D mapping function. It means that you're able to really kind of like experience locations in somewhat of a more realistic way. So if there's a particular area, like in Snowdonia this week, I sort of knew roughly the kind of area that I wanted to go, and then I was just using Google Earth and the Street View to kind of pinpoint things on the map that I thought looked interesting, whether those are buildings or, you know, rivers and, you know, forests, that kind of stuff. And it just gives you an idea of what's in the area that you're going to be working in. And then all I will do is I will save all of these points that I think are worth visiting. And then I create a folder within Google Maps of all of the starred locations that I have for that particular place. I've done this for trips as well. When I went to Scotland last September, I went around the Outer Hebrides and we went to Mull and to Skye and to the Isles of Lewis and Harris. And I'd used the same principle there. I was just saving a load of locations that I wanted to visit, and I had them all nicely collated in a folder, so then I could just pick one at any random time and I would be able to get the directions and be able to get there really easily. And if you are planning trips, now it's all very well and good in the summer to just be able to go to places locally that you know, but a lot of people travel in the summer. You know, summer is a great time for going on holidays and going on trips. So if you are going on a slightly more, I guess, unknown photography mission, if you're going to places that you are unfamiliar with and that you don't necessarily know exactly what you're going to get when you arrive at these places, then apps and software such as Milanote are a really, really great organizational tool, and it's something that I used for my last trip, which was to the North Yorkshire coast. Now, Milanote is great because it integrates with a lot of other softwares. If you see anything on Google, you can pin it and add it to the boards that you can create in Milanote. So what I do typically on Milanote is I will create boards for particular locations, and then within those boards I'm going to be pinning things like Google Map entries for coordinates and directions. I'm going to be making lists of locations, and I'm going to be adding things like, you know, itineraries of what time I'm going to be going to these places. I'm going to create lists for what camera gear that I want to take with me. And all of that sits in a nicely laid out page that you can just call up on your phone within the app. And the beauty of it is you can create multiple different boards for either multiple trips or multiple locations. And I find if I have something like that already constructed and formed, then if I'm just scrolling on my phone one evening and I come across something that I think, oh, that would be a great place to go and take photos, then I have something already pre-made where I can save that quickly. I think the worst thing of all when you're trying to plan trips, or where you kind of stumble across something in an unexpected place or at an unexpected time, it's kind of like, oh, well, what do I do with that? You know, I don't have anywhere to kind of quickly save it. You might make a note of it in the Notes app on your phone, but then it's kind of lost in things like shopping lists and other things that you might use a Notes app for. But having these dedicated places like folders in Google Maps or like software like Milanote, it just means that if you ever see anything, you can just quickly add it at a moment's notice in a place that makes sense and is very organized for that particular topic. So I'm a big advocate of all of these tools. I think they're great, and I think they really do help with the just overall photography process, because from the planning phase to the shooting stage, you kind of have everything that you need, and it gives you the best opportunity to get results that you're happy with. Planning is definitely a skill in photography that isn't necessarily spoken about enough. I think a lot of people do get hung up on things like camera settings and gear, but not as many people will actually think about what goes into planning a shoot and planning the photos that you end up with. So hopefully these will be useful to you. I will leave some links in the description below to some of these different apps so you can go and check them out for yourself. And if you've enjoyed this video and you found these tips helpful, then do consider hitting the subscribe button. It's really great making these videos. I love going out in the field and I love taking the time to make these short films, and hitting the subscribe button just shows me that you guys are interested in this type of content. And on that note as well, if you have enjoyed this video, do make sure to give it a thumbs up. As always, thank you so much for all the support that you show on this channel. It means so much to me, and I really, really enjoy publishing these videos every Thursday at around 5 PM local time here in the UK. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next week for another video.